Oxygen debt. I'm telling you the '86 Mets would destroy any modern team, Ramirez said, his voice crackling slightly through the calm. It's not even close. Chen laughed, adjusting a mounting bolt on the solar array. You're absolutely delusional. Baseball 400 years ago, they were basically cavemen with sticks. Exactly my point. Pure, unadulterated skill. No genetic optimization, no reaction time enhancement, no neural interfaces telling them exactly where the ball's going to be. Just a guy, a bat, and the audacity to think he can hit a 90-mile-per-hour fastball. So your argument is that they were worse players, therefore better. My argument is that they were actually playing the game instead of executing an algorithm. There's a difference between playing baseball and being very good at baseball-shaped math. Chen grinned inside her helmet. That's the most pretentious thing you've said all week, and you spent Tuesday explaining why synthesized coffee is an insult to agriculture. It is an insult to agriculture. Coffee should come from a plant, not a printer. I don't care how molecularly identical it is. You realize that literally nobody but you cares about this, right? You're like a medieval knight complaining about cannons. Progress happened. Get over it. Progress, Ramirez said with mock solemnity, is just another word for giving up on doing things properly. I bet the guy who invented the wheel immediately had some jackass friend telling him, you know, circles are so last season. Have you considered hexagons? Hexagons are efficient. Hexagons are an admission of defeat. They worked in companionable silence for a moment. Out here on the night side of Prometheus 7, the only lights were their helmet lamps and the distant stars. The mining rig was a skeletal thing, all struts and solar panels and ore processors, clinging to a rock tumbling through the asteroid belt. It wasn't beautiful, but after 6 months it was home. You know what I miss? Ramirez said suddenly. Real weather, not the artificial cycles in the habitat, but actual weather. Random, inconvenient, occasionally dangerous weather. Rain that ruins your plans, snow that makes you late, heat that makes you want to die. You miss wanting to die. I miss having something to complain about that isn't philosophical. When's the last time either of us got genuinely, meaninglessly annoyed at something? Everything out here is either fine or it's a critical system failure. There's no middle ground, no traffic jams, no loud neighbors, no coffee shops that inexplicably run out of oat milk. I see someone's been reading his nostalgic earth poetry again. I've been out here for 9 months, Maya, 9 months. Do you know what I dream about now? Bureaucracy. I had a dream last week where I was standing in line at the DMV, and it was the best dream I've had in 6 months. That's deeply sad. The line was 40 people long, there was bad fluorescent lighting, a child was crying, it was perfect. He paused. I think I'm becoming unfit for civilization. You were already unfit for civilization. That's why you took a job 200 million kilometers from the nearest decent restaurant. Hey, there's a perfectly decent restaurant in the Habitat module. Carlos, it's a microwave and a protein paste dispenser. I said decent, not good. I have standards, just very low ones. Chen secured another bolt, checking the tension readout on her HUD. 22 more days and we rotate back. What's the first thing you're doing? Eating something that didn't come out of a tube. Then probably complaining about how crowded Earth is and how much I hate traffic. Give me 3 days, and I'll be telling everyone how peaceful and simple life in the belt is. Human beings are ridiculous. Says the woman who volunteered to spend a year living in a tin, can orbiting a space rock. I was promised adventure and competitive pay. And instead you got me talking about the metaphysical implications of hexagons and my weird DMV fantasies. The competitive pay better be worth it. It won't be, Ramirez said cheerfully, but at least you'll have great stories. Remember that time I spent a year in the asteroid belt with a lunatic who thought coffee should grow on trees? People will be fascinated. Coffee does grow on trees. Exactly, and yet here we are, drinking brown liquid that was assembled atom by atom from the same raw materials as our hull plating. It's like drinking the ship. Now who's being pretentious? I'm not pretentious, I'm principled. There's a difference. What's the difference? Pretentious people are wrong. Principled people are right but annoying. Chen was about to respond when she saw it. A glint in the starlight, something small moving fast. Her brain had just enough time to register meteor before. The impact hit Ramirez mid-laugh. Chen saw the flash, a brief spark where the micrometeorite, no bigger than a grain of sand but moving at 30 kilometers per second, punched through his helmet just above the visor seal. She saw him jerk backward, his tether snapping like thread, his body tumbling away into the infinite black. "Carlos," she screamed, "Carlos." His comm died instantly. Just static where his voice had been a heartbeat before, where he'd been teasing her about hexagons, where he'd been alive and whole and annoying in the best possible way. She watched him drift, 50 meters away now and growing, his body tumbling slowly, arms and legs loose. Not moving, not activating his thrusters, not responding. And then Chen felt the cold. Sharp and wrong, spreading across her right side like ice water in her veins. She looked down and saw the second puncture. The fragment or debris or whatever the universe had thrown at them had hit her too. A tiny hole just below her ribs, barely visible, already venting oxygen into space. Her HUD flashed crimson, suit breach, oxygen venting, thruster pack offline. The impact had severed something critical. She was drifting too now, away from the rig, away from safety. And Carlos was out there, maybe dead, maybe dying, definitely unconscious and tumbling further into the void with every passing second. The mining rig was already 100 meters away and shrinking. The habitat module was on the far side of the asteroid, shielded from line of sight. There was no one else. No crew to call, no rescue team, just her and Carlos and the cold mathematics of vacuum. Chen pulled her emergency patch kit with shaking hands and pressed it against the breach. The foam expanded, hardened, sealed. The venting stopped. Her oxygen counter stabilized at 38 minutes. 38 minutes to save them both. Or 38 minutes to die trying. She looked at Carlos's tumbling form, 60 meters away now. Looked at the rig receding with every heartbeat. Looked at her tool belt, a bolt gun, a plasma cutter, a 50-meter tether line. That was all she had. But Carlos had been her friend, her only companion for 6 months of isolation in the deepest black. The man who'd argued about baseball and coffee and hexagons, who'd made terrible jokes about DMV fantasies, who'd kept her sane when the walls of the habitat felt like they were closing in. She wasn't leaving him. Chen pulled out the bolt gun, 6 shots, each one a kinetic anchor driver powerful enough to punch through asteroid rock. Each shot would create recoil, push her in whatever direction she aimed away from. She started calculating vectors, plotting trajectories, doing the math that would determine whether they both lived or both died. 37 minutes of oxygen left. Time to work. Chen aimed the bolt gun perpendicular to her drift, calculated the angle to intercept Carlos's tumbling path, and fired. The recoil pushed her, bent her trajectory. She waited, watching the numbers change on her wrist display, then fired again. Her vector was shifting, bending toward him. Oxygen, 34 minutes. One more shot to fine-tune her approach. She fired. Now she was on an intercept course. She'd reach him in 90 seconds. She used the time to prep her tether line, coiling the smart cable and checking the magnetic grapple. It was designed for equipment recovery, but it would have to work for this. 50 meters, 40, 30. Chen threw the tether when he was 20 meters away. The magnetic grapple caught his equipment belt and locked on. She pulled herself hand over hand down the line, closing the distance. When she reached him, she grabbed his shoulders and looked through his faceplate. Blood was spreading across the inside of his visor from a head wound. His eyes were closed, but his suit's biomonitor showed a heartbeat. Weak, irregular, but there. "Hold on, Carlos," she whispered. "I've got you, just hold on." Now she had to get them both back. They were 300 meters from the rig now, drifting at 2 meters per second. Combined mass, 200 kilograms, 3 bolts left in the bolt gun. 3 chances to change their course enough to reach safety. The math was brutal and immediate. It wouldn't be enough. But then Chen saw it, 30 meters to her left, tumbling in the debris field. A damaged solar panel from an earlier accident, maybe 2 meters long, mostly intact. Space junk they'd been meaning to retrieve. Or salvation. She fired a bolt at empty space, using the recoil to push them toward the panel. When they reached it, she grabbed the frame with one hand while keeping Carlos tethered to her. The panel was bent but serviceable, still had most of its reflective coating. Chen pulled out her plasma cutter. Normally used for repairs, it could generate a focused beam hot enough to vaporize metal. She'd never tried to use it as a rocket engine. First time for everything. She positioned the panel behind them, aimed the plasma cutter at its surface, and fired. The reflective coating began to vaporize instantly, creating an expanding plume of metallic gas. The panel pushed forward against the vapor, and through Newton's third law, pushed them in the opposite direction. Toward the rig. Chen held the cutter steady, adjusting angle constantly to maintain thrust. Her arms burned. The heat bled through her gloves, but they were moving. 1 meter per second, 0.8, 0.6. The rig grew larger, 200 meters, 150. Her plasma cutter fuel cell dropped to 20%. She shut it off to conserve what remained. They were coasting now, drifting toward safety at less than a meter per second. Oxygen, 26 minutes. 100 meters, 75. Then Chen saw the problem. Their trajectory was off by maybe 10 degrees. They'd missed the main structure by 50 meters, close enough to see every rivet and weld, far enough to be death. She had 2 bolts left, 2 chances. At 60 meters, she aimed carefully and fired through the center of the panel. The recoil shifted their vector. 5 degrees, not enough. 40 meters from the rig, 1 bolt remaining. Chen looked at Carlos, unconscious and depending on her. Looked at the rig's cargo boom extending from the main structure, a long arm she might be able to reach if she got the angle exactly right. She raised the bolt gun, calculated angle, recoil, trajectory. Her hands were shaking from cold and oxygen deprivation. This was it. Everything came down to this. She fired. The recoil twisted them, changing their path. 20 meters, 15, 10. The cargo boom swept toward them like a slow-motion baseball bat. Chen reached out with both hands, magnetic gloves activated. Her fingers closed around the metal strut. The impact nearly tore her arms from their sockets, but she held on. She pulled herself and Carlos along the boom, hand over exhausted hand, toward the airlock. Oxygen, 14 minutes. 50 meters of crawling, dragging Carlos, fighting her own fading consciousness. Then the airlock, then cycling, then precious air flooding her suit as she collapsed onto the deck. Chen lay there gasping, unable to move. Her HUD showed 4 minutes of oxygen remaining when the airlock finally cycled. 4 minutes. She looked over at Carlos, still unconscious but breathing. His suit's medical system was already treating the head wound, stabilizing him. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered. "I need someone to argue with." And then, because she'd earned it, because they'd both earned it, Chen closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. They'd both wake up in the Habitat's medical bay 8 hours later. Carlos would have a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Chen would have hypothermia and severe dehydration. They'd spend 2 weeks recovering before they could work again. And on day 3, when Carlos finally remembered what happened, he'd look at her and say, "I still think the 86 Mets would win." Chen would throw a pillow at him. Some things never changed, even in space.